Are you enjoying this podcast? Well, you have KUOW members to thank for that. KUOW members make the trusted local journalism and storytelling you hear on this show possible. Become a member today and help support the production of this podcast. It only takes a minute. Make a donation at KUOW.org or follow the link in the show notes. And thanks.
You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. Washington's 3rd Congressional District covers the southwest corner of the state, from Long Beach to Mount Adams and Yelm down to Vancouver. It's also the home of one of the most fiercely contested congressional seats in the entire country. In 2022, Republican challenger Joe Kent defeated incumbent Representative Jaime Herrera Beutler in the primary, and then lost to Democrat Marie Gluesenkamp Perez in the general election by roughly 2,600 votes. This time around, Gluesenkamp Perez is the incumbent, and the way the primary race is shaping up, she will likely be facing either Kent or his Republican Party competition in the primary, Camas City Council member Leslie Lewallen, in November. This week, we've invited the leading candidates in the race on for interviews to get a sense of their policy positions and vision for the future. Joining me now is Representative Marie Gluesenkamp Perez, a Democrat in her first term representing the 3rd District of Washington State in Congress. Hi, Congresswoman. Thanks for being here. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So to start off, why do you think 3rd District voters should pick you to continue to represent them in Congress? And we're looking for kind of the Cliff's Notes version here. Folks are busy. Give us your top lines.
Yeah, so I actually don't have real prior elected experience. I came to Congress. I'd been running an auto repair at a machine shop with my husband. I have a toddler. I live in a rural part of the district. I get my internet from a radio tower, and I think those are the kinds of experiences that inform legislation that matters to normal people. Everyone is really tired of partisan bickering and the chaos and disruption, and I am too. And that's why I ran for Congress, to represent normal people who are, trying to get a spot in daycare or buy their first house, not the agenda of people on Twitter.
There's been a lot of ink spilled about you lately in national political press. I mean, you're probably the most vulnerable House member in the country, if you believe those types of rankings. So it's not unexpected. Politico, the New York Times, they've written about this kind of assessment of you, that you're not really voting with progressives the way that many on the left were hoping you would. A young Latina, member of Congress in her first term. A quote from Slate called you a Kyrsten Sinema wannabe after you voted against President Biden's $400 million student loan forgiveness program. At the same time, I spoke with Joe Kent, one of your opponents, earlier this week, and he really hammers you for being what he calls in lockstep with President Biden on issues. So I guess my question for you, Congresswoman, is who are you? Are you a Democrat in name only or a woke extremist? Do either of those titles define you?
Yeah, it's so funny. The same week that I got called a Kyrsten Sinema wannabe, I also had a newspaper article written about me that I was a rural Antifa, and I think the political binary is so broken. It's probably a false distinction to begin with. I think that reality, is not reflected in a left versus right spectrum. I would say that politics is 3D. It is a nuance. Truth exists in nuance. There is not a monopoly on good ideas on either side. And we are not going to fix Congress if we have just lockstep, top-down voting strategies. My job is to represent a very diverse district. This is, as you pointed out, this is the 3rd reddest seat held by a Democrat in Congress. It voted for Trump in 16 and 20, and today, after redistricting, would still vote for him by 5 to 6 points. And my job is to reflect my values, the values of my community. And that looks really different than it would for a Democrat from New York City. I don't know a lot of people that want to be renters forever. And so putting all your political muscle behind rent control doesn't help people who are trying to buy a starter home. Like, I focus on things that create housing abundance, ensuring that people can build their own homes, that we can have a secure middle class life, that, we don't have to have 3 jobs at once and run ourselves ragged, but we have dignity and respect for work and all of the pathways that can get you there. I have worked in the trades basically my entire professional career, and it was really crazy to, we had our auto shop protest. We had protests organized at our auto shop by people with like PhDs. We had to shut down the shop because they were not happy with my student debt vote. But the bigger structural question for me is, why has tuition increased 481% since I was born? We have got to fix the systemic issues that, create this prisoner's dilemma of, get in terrible debt or you're never going to have a fulfilling career. You're not going to have access to the labor market. I think that there are a million ways to be smart, and not just academic intelligence. We've got to honor all of those ways and create real pathways for everyone, regardless of what their natural gifts and abilities and interests are, not just academic intelligence.
Is it fair, though, Congresswoman, to say I'm going to vote against relieving debt from students who are, underwater and really struggling? I think the sense was that part of what went into that was the fact that you don't have a high percentage of people in your district, again, that, have maybe a student debt or college degrees, but that voting against that relief was saying like, oh, that's somebody else's problem. And, that's not something that I want to align with Democrats on. Is that a fair position to take when people are struggling?
I mean, it's certainly true. When I looked at the numbers, Washington, D.C. was the area that would have benefited the most out of any state. Washington State was 48 out of 50, and my district only holds 3% of the federally issued debt. Like, people in my district are very independent. They've chosen to pursue different avenues to have economic freedom. And, I think that it's more important for us to go after the systemic failures than to try to get party favors for discrete constituencies. And listen, I know, it's awful for people out there who are struggling to get their head out of the debt load. But in a constrained, economy, we need to be strategic about how we're achieving those goals. Most of the elementary schools in my district, many of them don't have air conditioning. So, to have a kindergarten class that's like, 85 degrees inside, that's not fair either. And it doesn't get, and I actually hosted a roundtable, and I had an activist tell me, well, it's not about the kindergartners, like, I vote. And that's not what democracy should be about. It should be about the net benefit to our whole community and holding accountable the players that are, getting us to fight against each other.
One of the ways that you've stood out for many of your Democratic colleagues is that you were one of the first members of Congress to say publicly that you believe President Biden is headed for a loss in November. And you've also said that Biden should, quote, do what he knows is right for the country and put the national interest first. President Biden has remained adamant that he's going to stay in the race. He says that talking about him dropping out is a distraction from policies that former President Donald Trump plans to implement if he's reelected. So I want to ask you directly, are you calling for President Biden to step aside?
This is a really sad and difficult situation for the country. And I chose my words very, very carefully last week. What I said is that I had spent the last 2 weeks listening to my constituents express their concerns about the president's age and health. And, like a lot of people in my district, I have serious questions about the president's ability to judge his own health and fitness to do the job. I am actually not talking about a campaign. I don't feel any kind of moral obligation or duty to involve myself in a presidential race. What I do have a duty, I believe, to do is ensure that our country is being governed properly and led by elected leaders, not political advisors.
And I want to drill in on those comments, because that was something that popped out to me, was that, you said that you've been listening to your constituents, you're doubting the president's judgment about his health and fitness, and then specifically you're doubting whether he is the one making important decisions about our country rather than unelected advisors. So are you suggesting that the president is not in control? Because that's what Republicans are saying. I mean, Ron DeSantis called Biden a weekend at Bernie's president. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, a lot of places are reporting there's a shrinking circle of advisors the president will listen to right now.
But that's different than saying that he's not. He's listening to maybe a fewer number of people. But saying that he's not making the decisions that's a big claim. And I want to know if you have any evidence of that.
Well, I think a lot of disturbing things have been reported by many sources. And I think it's important that the president has the chance to make a deliberative choice and operate with a modicum of dignity and make the choice for himself. He's the only one who can make this choice. But my duty is to reflect the concerns of my community.
Let's move on to immigration. It's something that is going to be continuing to be a major issue, of course, in this campaign and beyond. Your opponent, Joe Kent, was on our show this week and was critical of your voting record on the issue. He says Marie Perez voted against it. She voted to codify Biden's invasion. She voted for the fentanyl deaths, and she voted for the illegal immigration. She's done nothing about it. And when Joe Kent says that you voted against it, he's talking about a House Republican-led bill that didn't receive any Democratic votes. But let's get to the heart of the issue that he's accusing you of here. I mean, he's saying you're too soft on unauthorized border crossings. So how do you respond to that, first of all? And what changes do you want to see on immigration policy and border security?
I mean, the facts are clear that I have led on this issue. The fentanyl crisis is very, very real, and the wreckage is painful in communities like mine. People getting in car wrecks, overdosing in the parking lot at work, losing their children, losing their lives. The fentanyl crisis is awful. And it's not an extreme position to say that we have a duty and an obligation to secure our borders. And so I've called on the president repeatedly to regain operational control of the southern border, to exercise his authority under Title 42 or remain in Mexico. My votes are clear. My public record is very clear on this. And it's been very frustrating for me to see the narrative oriented around, just the visceral pictures of the border. I would argue the fuller humanitarian picture is what it's like to try to run a business in Mexico under the boot of a cartel that is, extorting your family business. The experience of people who are being trafficked. Those are the obligations of our nation to secure the border and end the influence of cartels. And so I've been unabashed in this. I think it's a different perspective. My father's from Mexico, and I've heard a lot of stories, and up close and personal, that this is not a humanitarian crisis that is often seen in pictures, but it is absolutely felt in Mexico. And so we have a duty to secure the southern border.
Let's move on to this big infrastructure project that is partially in your district, the I-5 bridge replacement between Vancouver and Portland. It just received an additional $1.5 billion federal dollars on top of the $600 million already secured for the project. You helped get some of that federal funding. Your opponents, Joe Kent and Leslie Lewallen, have criticized the current plan to replace the bridge with a new span of 4 lanes of traffic each way. They both instead support the idea of retrofitting the existing bridge and adding a third bridge, which would bypass commercial truck and freight and move it around the metro areas of Portland and Vancouver. They also say that voters in Southwest Washington have rejected funding light rail multiple times and that they don't believe it should be part of the bridge project. Why do you support the current plans to replace the bridge, including the light rail portion?
Well, this bridge is been rated functionally obsolete, and I fought tooth and nail to bring these federal tax dollars back to Washington State. For me, it's not just about the dollar amount, but it's also about the cultural value of, are we going to live in a nation that honors our identity as, a people who can take on big projects and make investments in the future? But it's also important for federal representatives to stay in their lane. These questions about what color the bridge will be, that is the role of state and local representatives. And I think that honoring that is also part of my role. That said, part of the bridge is 107 years old, right? So I think that it's important when we think about how we build projects that we are future-proofing them. And we are seeing that a lot of young people are not getting their driver's licenses. They're not wanting to travel in the ways that a lot of people have. So I think it's important that we are building not just for today, for present use, but for what will be preferred in any future case. But those are decisions for local representatives and state representatives. I don't think that it's useful for me to, dip my paddle in to those decisions. I'm just working hard to make sure that we get those dollars back home and deployed in durable investments that honor our culture of being a nation of people that know how to make stuff.
Let's talk about the issue of gun rights. You represent a pretty rural district. You are a gun owner yourself. You've expressed some atypical positions on gun control from maybe your average Democrat, especially folks who live in a more urban setting. The assassination attempt against former President Donald Trump at his rally in Pennsylvania has really once again put the focus for some people on the availability of guns in this country and why, for example, a 20-year-old had easy access to a high-powered AR-15 rifle to undertake this heinous act. President Biden called again this week to bring back the assault weapons ban, which we had in this country for 10 years, stopping in 2004. Would you vote for such a policy, bringing back the assault weapons ban, if it is brought back and introduced into a bill in Congress?
Well, like you said, we ought to have a representative government that has electeds from all different kinds of walks of life. I live in a very rural part of a very rural county, and like a lot of my neighbors, it would take the sheriff's department a long time to get to my house. When we talk about regulation, it's important that we have representative voices at the table. And I also think it's important that we honor our Constitution. I do not support what's typically referred to as an assault weapons ban. I think that in our state, we have some really important safety reforms. Our emphasis on robust background checks, magazine capacity, those questions, and that puts me significantly to the left of much of my district. But political violence is real and escalating. And, the threats to our security and our democracy, from, extremists is real. That said, when we look at the big picture of gun violence, it's unquestionable that the vast majority are suicides. And I think it's important that when we talk about data, we're not just using it to score a political point, but we are thinking about the net value of how can we prevent any kind of these deaths. And it's when we think about and see who's committing suicide, a lot of young men, a lot of young people. And I think that does point right back to a lack of access to high quality trades programs in junior high and high school. Like, every kid needs a chance to be the smartest person in their school at some point during the day. And when we take away the sense of pride, the sense of upward mobility, the dignity that a lot of those programs bring to students, we invite a whole host of emotional and social problems.
Finally here, I know we'll probably just have time for one last question.
Sorry, Libby, and I would just like to draw one point of contrast. Joe Kent believes that we should have every weapon the military has, tactical nukes, machine guns. This will be my opponent in November. And I think it's really important that we understand what the field looks like when we're talking about these issues. It's easy to be inside a bubble of, what do my friends think about this issue? But my role is to talk about what is the broader debate in Southwest Washington, and how do I reflect those values in my votes, in my discussion, in my advocacy.
And we just have time for about one more question here, Congresswoman. Joe Kent was on the show earlier this week, and he told me that he now believes that abortion should be left to the states, the question of access to abortion after the Dobbs decision by the Supreme Court. Now, in 2022, he had said that he is in favor of a national abortion ban. He says he no longer would vote for that. He now believes that it's a state's issue. I know you went to Twitter after that interview and said that he's lying about that. Why do you think, that this is an important issue right now for you to be talking about in Congress? Because according to, again, Republicans like Joe Kent, this has now been removed kind of from the question, of federal law. Like, this is now just with the states, and Congress is not going to have to worry about it. What's your response to that?
I place no confidence in Joe's purported shift. He already told us what he thinks. He wants a national ban on abortion with no exceptions for rape or incest. He wants the sheriff showing up on your front door asking you to prove whether it was a miscarriage or you did it on purpose. I am incensed that we have staffer bros in their 20s wearing Brooks Brothers deciding what kind of health care women can access and when. There is no room for those people in our decisions about when we access care, what kind of care we access. Being pregnant it can be terrifying. These dudes don't know what percentoplevia is. They don't know what preeclampsia is. They don't know how easy it is to lose your life, to lose your ability to have a family. And they don't care. We're a football to them. They're going to shift what they say when the pollsters tell them to. But we know what they think, and they are coming for our rights. We are not safe in Washington state with these kinds of weirdos writing legislation and lying to us about what their values are. Their values are control. They are so far removed from the experience of the women I talk to every day who are deeply concerned about the future of our country and how this bodes for our respect for humanity, for our rights as Americans and people.
Congresswoman Marie Gluesenkamp Perez, thank you so much for your time today. And I really appreciate your thoughtful answers. I hope we can keep talking as the election and this race continues throughout the year. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much, Libby. I appreciate you.
You're listening to Soundside. If you want to hear my interview with 3rd District candidate Joe Kent, Marie Gluesenkamp Perez is one of her rivals in this race. That's up on the Soundside podcast feed right now or over at the KUOW app. And I want to note that we did invite the other Republican in the race, Camas City Council member Leslie Lewallen, at the same time as we invited Kent and Perez. We did hear back, and now we are working on scheduling that for later this month. Thanks for listening to Soundside. And hey, this show is only possible because listeners support us. If you are able to give right now, check out the show notes for a link to donate. And don't forget, you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m., Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org.